The moon casts a pale glow over a quiet, close-knit town. Crickets chirp in the background. We see a figure running through a dense forest, panting heavily.
Int.
House, living room, night. Detective Grace Harris, 30s, sharp, determined, sits at her desk, flipping through photos of Elsa Turner, a young woman in her early 20s, smiling in happier times. The phone rings. Dispatcher VO. Detective Harris, we found her. It's bad. EXT, forest clearing, night. Grace arrives at the scene. Yellow crime scene tape marks the area. Officers and forensics teams surround Elsa's lifeless body, partially concealed in the underbrush. Forensic tech. Blunt force trauma. Likely happened a few hours ago. No witnesses so far. Grace, to herself. Who could have done this and why? Montage. Grace starts investigating. Grace interviews Elsa's best friend, Sophie, mid-20s, nervous, hiding something. A tense conversation with Elsa's ex-boyfriend, Ryan, 30, cocky, suspicious. Reviewing surveillance footage of Elsa at a diner the night before.
Int.
Police station. Interrogation room, day. Ryan sits across from Grace, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. Grace. You and Elsa had a heated argument 2 nights ago. Witnesses heard yelling. Ryan coldly. We argued, yeah. But I didn't kill her. I loved her. Grace. Love doesn't bruise, Ryan. And it doesn't leave someone dead in the woods.
Int.
Elsa's apartment, day. Grace searches Elsa's belongings. She finds a journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Flipping through the pages, she discovers entries about Elsa being followed by someone. Elsa's journal, VO. Everywhere I go, he's there. Watching. Waiting. I don't feel safe anymore.
Int.
Town library, night. Grace digs into Elsa's past, uncovering a disturbing connection to a local businessman, Philip Reed, 50s, powerful, controlling. Grace, to herself. Why were you afraid of him, Elsa? What did he want from you?
Int.
Police station, war room, night. Grace pieces the clues together on a board filled with photos, maps, and sticky notes. Ryan had a motive, jealousy. Sophie had a motive, betrayal. Philip had power and connections. Grace. One of you killed her. But which one?
Int.
Sophie's apartment, night. Grace confronts Sophie, who finally breaks down. Sophie. She wanted to expose him. Philip Reed. She found out about his illegal deals. He threatened her, Grace. But I swear, I didn't think he'd actually do it.
Int.
Police station, Chief's office, day. Grace presents her findings to Chief Marshal, 50s, skeptical. Grace. Philip Reed had everything to lose. Elsa was going to blow the whistle on his operation. We have her journal, Sophie's statement, and bank records tying him to payoffs. Chief Marshal. You don't have enough for an arrest warrant. Not yet.
Int.
Grace's car, night. Grace follows Philip Reed as he drives out of town. He pulls into an abandoned warehouse. Grace grabs her gun and exits the car.
Int.
Abandoned warehouse, night. Grace sneaks inside and overhears Philip talking to one of his henchmen. Philip. She should have stayed quiet. She forced my hand. And now Detective Harris is sniffing around. Take care of her, henchman. Understood. Grace steps out of the shadows, gun raised. Grace. Game over, Philip. You're under arrest. Philip smirks, but slowly raises his hands.
Int.
Police station. Later that night. Philip sits in a cell. Grace looks at a framed photo of Elsa on her desk, her expression a mix of relief and sadness. EXT Elsa's grave, day. Grace places flowers on Elsa's grave. Grace, softly. You got justice, Elsa. I hope you can rest now. As Grace stands silently at Elsa's grave, a gust of wind carries the sound of leaves rustling. She closes her eyes, taking a deep breath, as though sensing Elsa's presence. Grace, softly. I promise to make sure no one else gets hurt like you did. Suddenly, her phone buzzes. She looks down at the screen. It's a message from an unknown number. Text message. You think it's over? You've only scratched the surface. Keep digging, detective. Grace's face hardens as she quickly looks around, scanning her surroundings. There's no one in sight.
Int.
Grace's apartment, night. The dimly lit room is filled with case files and notes pinned to the wall. Grace sits at her desk, staring at her phone, rereading the mysterious message. She opens Elsa's journal again, flipping to the last few pages. She notices a page that had been stuck to another. Carefully peeling them apart, she discovers a cryptic drawing of a key with a series of numbers written beside it. 42.37.19, 117.21.03. Grace, to herself. Coordinates, but to what?
Int.
Police station, war room, next morning. Grace pins a copy of the coordinates on the board. A junior officer, Dylan, 20s, eager but inexperienced, looks over her shoulder.
Dylan.
Those lead to an old property outside town. Belonged to Philip Reed's company until a few months ago. Grace. Get me everything you can on it. Ownership records, recent visitors, anything. EXT, abandoned property, day. Grace and Dylan pull up to the property in an unmarked car. It's a crumbling, isolated building surrounded by overgrown vegetation. They draw their weapons as they approach cautiously. Inside, they find stacks of documents, surveillance equipment, and what appears to be a ledger detailing payoffs and illegal activities involving influential people in the town. Dylan whispering, "This goes way beyond Philip Reed." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoes in the distance. Grace gestures for Dylan to stay quiet.
Int.
Abandoned property, back room, continuous. They find a laptop on a desk, still powered on, showing encrypted files. Grace plugs in a USB drive to copy the data. Just then, the door creaks open. A masked figure steps inside, holding a gun. Masked figure. "You shouldn't have come here, detective." Grace. "And you shouldn't have underestimated me." A tense standoff ensues. Grace fires a warning shot, and Dylan tackles the masked figure, disarming him.
Int.
Police station, night. The masked figure sits in an interrogation room, refusing to speak. Grace and Chief Marshall watch from behind the one-way glass. Chief Marshall. Whoever he works for, they're not going to let this go. "You're in deep now, Harris."
Grace.
"I don't care. Elsa wanted the truth to come out, and I'm going to make sure it does."
Int.
Grace's apartment, late night. Grace sifts through the copied data on her laptop. She finds names, dates, and accounts tied to prominent figures in the town. One name stands out. Mayor Henry Wells. Grace, to herself. Of course. The man who pretends to keep this town clean. Just as she begins to type up her findings, her screen goes black. A red message appears. "Stop or you're next." Grace stares at the screen, her expression unshaken. She grabs her notepad and starts writing down everything manually. EXT, Town Square, day. The town buzzes with activity. Grace walks through, blending in, but her eyes scan the crowd. She notices Mayor Wells shaking hands with citizens, smiling for photos. Grace approaches him. Grace, calmly, "We need to talk." Mayor Wells, smiling but tense. "Detective Harris. Always working. Can it wait until after the weekend?" Grace. "Not unless you want me to share what I found with the press." The mayor's smile fades. Grace is pacing, flipping through her notes. She's connecting the dots between the names in the files and events in the town over the last few years. A knock at the door startles her. She grabs her gun and cautiously approaches. "Grace." "Who is it?" Voice muffled. "Dylan." "Open up." Grace opens the door to find Dylan, looking pale and shaken. Dylan, panicked. "Someone just tried to run me off the road." "They know we're onto them, Grace." Grace, calm but firm. "That means we're getting close." "Did you bring the files?" Dylan hands her a USB drive, shaking his head. "Dylan." "Grace, this isn't just about Elsa anymore. This is bigger than Philip Reed. Bigger than we thought." Grace plugs the drive into her laptop. On the screen, she sees encrypted files detailing bribes, illegal land deals, and violent crimes, all connected to a shadowy network of powerful individuals.
Dylan.
This goes up to state-level officials. Maybe higher. If we push this any further, we might not make it out alive. Grace, determined. If we don't, who will? Elsa died trying to expose this. We owe her the truth.
Int.
Police station, war room. Next morning. Grace presents the evidence to Chief Marshal. Chief Marshal, shaking his head. This is a powder keg. If you're right, this implicates half the town's leadership and some of our own officers. Grace, we can't cover this up. Not anymore. Chief Marshal, if we move too fast, they'll bury us. You need to tread carefully, Harris.
Int.
Mayor Wells' office, stay. Mayor Wells sits at his desk, flipping through documents with a calm, sinister demeanor. A man in black, 40s, cold, professional, stands nearby. Mayor Wells. Harris is becoming a problem. What's our contingency plan? Man in black. We're monitoring her. But if she gets too close... He gestures subtly, implying lethal action. Mayor Wells, smirking. Then make it look like an accident. We can't afford loose ends.
Int.
Grace's car, night. Grace drives through a dark road, heading toward the state attorney's office to present the evidence. Dylan is in the passenger seat, anxiously scanning their surroundings. Dylan, I don't like this. We're sitting ducks out here. Suddenly, a black SUV speeds up behind them, its headlights blinding. The SUV rams into their car, forcing Grace to swerve off the road. EXT, wooded area, night. Grace and Dylan crawl out of the wreckage, bruised but alive. The SUV stops, and two masked men step out, armed. Dylan whispering, "We need to run." Grace grabs her gun from the car and fires a warning shot.
Grace.
Get behind me. A tense shootout ensues. Grace manages to take down one of the attackers, while the other escapes into the woods. Dylan, panting, they're not going to stop. We need backup. Grace, resolute. No, we need to finish this now.
Int.
Abandoned cabin, later that night. Grace and Dylan take refuge in an abandoned cabin. Grace bandages Dylan's arm as they strategize their next move. Dylan, if we don't make it out of this, people need to know the truth. Grace hands him a copy of the USB drive.
Grace. Take this.
If anything happens to me, get it to the media. Blow this wide open. Dylan, shaking his head. We're in this together, Grace. I'm not leaving you behind.
Int.
Town hall, night. Grace infiltrates a secret meeting at the town hall, where Mayor Wells and other conspirators are discussing their plans. She hides in the shadows, recording their conversation on her phone. Mayor Wells. With Harris out of the way, we can proceed as planned. The election will secure our control. CO conspirator. And what about the Reed situation? Mayor Wells. Reed was a scapegoat. He served his purpose. The real operation is untouchable. Grace's phone buzzes accidentally, alerting the room. The conspirators turn, spotting her.
Int.
Town hall, chase scene. Grace sprints through the dark corridors as the conspirators give chase. She uses her knowledge of the building to outmaneuver them, narrowly escaping through a side exit.
Int.
Police station, dawn. Grace bursts into the station, bloodied and exhausted. She hands the recording to Chief Marshal.
Grace.
This is it. Everything we need to bring them down. Chief Marshal hesitates, then nods. Chief Marshal. I'll get this to the state attorney. But you need to lay low until this blows over. EXT, Town Square, days later. The town is in upheaval as news of the conspiracy breaks. Mayor Wells is arrested, along with several high-ranking officials. Reporters swarm the square, and Grace watches from the sidelines, her face a mix of relief and exhaustion. Dylan, smiling, "You did it, Grace." Grace. We did it. But this is just the beginning. There's always another shadow waiting to rise. The news of the arrests plays on Grace's television. She's sitting on the couch, nursing a coffee, her mind visibly heavy. Though justice has been served, she knows the case has left scars. The broadcast shows Mayor Wells and the other conspirators being escorted into custody. News anchor, VO, Today marks a turning point for our small town as Mayor Henry Wells and several other prominent figures were arrested for their roles in a massive corruption and criminal network. However, sources say this may only be the tip of the iceberg. Grace turns off the TV, tossing the remote aside. She opens Elsa's journal, which she's kept with her throughout the investigation. A small smile crosses her lips as she reads one of Elsa's lighter, more hopeful entries. Elsa's journal, VO. One day, people will listen. They'll see the truth. And when that day comes, I'll finally feel free. Grace closes the journal, her resolve stronger than ever. EXT Park, Day. A community vigil is held for Elsa. Candles flicker in the evening breeze as townspeople gather to honor her memory. Grace stands among them, blending into the crowd, but her eyes never stop scanning her surroundings. Sophie approaches Grace, holding a candle. Sophie, I can't thank you enough for what you did. Elsa would be proud. Grace, I just wish I could have done it sooner. Sophie, gently, you gave her justice. That's more than anyone else would have done.
Int.
Police station, war room, night. Grace is back at work. She pins a new photo to the board, a blurry image of a man in black, the one who escaped during the confrontation. Dylan enters holding a file. Got something for you. That masked man we encountered? We've got partial prints and a lead. Turns out, he's connected to a larger network operating out of the state capital. Grace narrows her eyes, her focus sharpening.
Grace.
Of course it doesn't end here. It never does.
Dylan.
So, what's the plan? Grace, smirking. We keep digging. If they think this is over, they're dead wrong.
Int.
Mysterious office, night. The camera pans to a dimly lit office. A powerful figure sits behind a desk, their face obscured. They pick up a phone, dialing a number. Powerful figure. Our operations in the town have been compromised. Start phase 2. And make sure Detective Harris doesn't interfere again. They hang up, leaning back in their chair as the camera reveals an elaborate map of connections, with Grace's name circled in red. XT City Skyline Night. The scene shifts to a bustling city, far from Grace's small town. The stakes have grown. As the camera pans out, the skyline glows ominously, hinting at a larger conspiracy that's only just beginning to unravel. Fade out. Text on screen. The fight for justice continues. To be continued.